Yuval, I think we're live. Or at least I hope.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey. A little music in the background. Give everybody a chance to join us live. Hopefully we're showing up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Probably on Twitter too now, right? Very cool. How are you doing today?
Good. Pretty good. How are you?
Doing great. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for everybody to get their questions in. I know a lot of people have been watching the shows, and so now hopefully they show up with their good questions, and they keep you busy for an hour. And I might just poke some fun along the way, but yeah, we'll see what comes in.
Yes, Mary on LinkedIn had one great question that we can get going with if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe we'll start off. Put a message out to everyone watching. So, all right, we've got the prompt out. And I'm seeing, I think we've got a good initial question here, so we can get started. Let me take care of that music there. All right, our first question has come in. Let's take a look at it. Here's one for you, Yuval. I think here. All right, so in practice, does SAFe encourage hierarchy and discourage self-autonomous teams? What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I guess the answer is it depends on who's practicing. Right?
So you've seen implementations where hierarchy is strictly enforced, self-management's not really encouraged, but you've also seen it the other way. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whether it's real agilists that are driving the SAFe implementation, or is it people that are coming from a world where hierarchy and management is their mental model, and they're trying to be agile, maybe even trying to make a real effort to be agile, but just making their first steps, and maybe they are still hierarchical and managing and not really following the SAFe principles. Just to be clear, SAFe doesn't encourage it. In practice, people might be doing it. SAFe actually encourages decentralized control. What might seem, there is a hierarchy in SAFe. There is a hierarchy of requirements. There is a hierarchy of artifacts and team structures from team level all the way up. That hierarchy doesn't necessarily infer top-down control. It infers what kind of relationship you have in the organization, and the fact that in a big organizations, there are teams, and there are teams of teams, and there are portfolios, and you need to manage these different layers in the organization, all with the same Lean Agile principles.
Very good. So, is it fair to say, Yuval, that in the SAFe literature, and within the principles and guidance given, more self-autonomous teams are encouraged?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Principle number 9 is decentralized control with alignment, but decentralized control.
Right.
And principle 8 is unlock the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers, which is one big part of it is autonomy.
Cool. It's a good question. Of course, I like the balance of that answer, right? There definitely is a hierarchy, right? There are certain roles, and those roles do fold up, but in principle, teams are expected to be autonomous. Great question. All right.
I would add one more thing.
Okay.
Like Scrum, SAFe also has mechanisms beyond the principles. SAFe has mechanisms, practices that encourage decentralized control that create different accountabilities for different things and empower teams to figure out how and how much, rather than telling them what to do. PI planning, for example, program increment planning, is designed to bring in the relevant people and create a clear separation of why are we doing something and what's the vision we're trying to work towards, but letting teams figure out how and how much, and letting designs and architecture and even requirements emerge from the work of these self-organizing teams.
Gotcha. No, it makes a lot of sense. Our next question from Zach. He is a member in the community, so welcome, Zach. So Yuval, what KPIs do you see monitored in a safe organization that can best surface potential issues in the execution on safe principles?
What KPIs do I see being monitored in safe organizations? So to tell you the truth, I'm not seeing too many of these KPIs, the specific KPIs being monitored, but there's one very high level one that's even included as one of the business results that SAFE aims to achieve. And I know you're familiar with a similar KPI as part of evidence-based management, which is value, and specifically both customer value, and there are different ways to measure that. Net Promoter Score is one, but also employee value, employee engagement and motivation. Using, for example, employee Net Promoter Score is one thing that organizations should be monitoring, because the aggregation of these two means that we're delivering value to our stakeholders, to our customers, in a sustainable way, in a way that respects the people inside the organization and creates an environment in which they thrive. So if I had to choose one KPI that helps us see whether we're delivering in a healthy manner, that would be that KPI. There are other KPIs, flow metrics that we're using in SAFE these days that would be familiar to people that are looking at flow metrics these days in the professional Scrum world as well, that are focused more on things like, are we innovating effectively? Is our time to market improving? Things like flow time, our flow load, or also known as work in process. Things like flow distribution. If in EBM we look at what are the kind of things that we're doing, how much of our time are we spending on innovating, how much time are we investing in keeping the lights on, dealing with defects. There's a similar metric called flow distribution in SAFE that talks about that. So just a couple of ideas to take a look at. The recent metrics article in the SAFE world has been reworked and is a great resource.
Right, and it seems like, and again, this is my bias coming out, but as with most good practices that emerge, SAFE likes to assimilate those in and claim them as their own. And it seems like flow metrics are getting pulled in quite heavily into some of the more recent SAFE literature. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't say SAFE is saying they're claiming them as their own. SAFE, the Scaled Agile framework team, they're acknowledging, they're looking at Nick Kirsten's work in Project to Product that has a certain type of flow metrics. Some of them overlap with the flow metrics that we talked about initially in the Scrum world, in the Kanban guide for Scrum teams. Most of them weren't born there either. Some of them are a bit different. I think SAFE does well not to reinvent the wheel, but to point to, bodies of work that have advanced the profession, have advanced what we're doing here, whether it's flow metrics, Donald Reinertson's work, team topologies. So cool. I think it's great that flow metrics are now part of SAFE. The one other metric that one other KPI I would suggest is beyond looking at are we delivering value effectively, we should also look at what are we actually trying to affect. So we should look at the KPIs that matter for the business process or operational value stream that we're actually trying to do something about, that our product is trying to improve. And that should be something specific to your product. If you're trying to improve self-driving cars, your metric should be related probably to the safety and accuracy and how often people feel comfortable to take off their hands from the wheel or something along these lines. It should have nothing to do with safe, agile, or any sort of process.
Cool. Thanks for that answer. Thanks for that question, Zach. We hope that was helpful. Another question coming in. How efficient is the IP sprint from innovation perspective in practice? What do you think there, Yuval? First, can you define an IP sprint so that people, for those that are not...
IP sprint or IP iteration stands for innovation and planning. There are a couple of reasons why SAFe includes an innovation and planning iteration or sprint. The main one is what Reinertsen calls ballast. You might also call it guard band, buffer, whatever you want to call it. Predictability of the cadence is important in SAFe. And we acknowledge that there's uncertainty and variability around what would it take to achieve our objectives in this PI. We have some assumptions in mind. We, take on an amount of work we think is reasonable, but we know, hopefully, we understand that there's uncertainty, and all of that is a forecast. But we do want to be very accurate about when the PI will end and when we will be able to have our cadence for the next PI. So in order to protect that cadence, and because the program increment, like 8 to 12 weeks, almost a quarter, is quite a longer term, and reviewing it, inspecting it, and planning the next one takes a couple of days, because it's a longer period of time. Even if you take, Scrum's 8 hours to plan 1 month and multiply it by 3, you would get something along 3 days. The altitude is higher. It's not the details of iteration sprint planning, but you get the idea. We want to carve out time to make that happen. And that's one of the main reasons that the innovation and planning iteration is there.
Cool.
So time for planning, and also time to take a breather. From doing the day-to-day work of the teams. One interesting thing that we can do in that time is focus on innovation. It's not that innovation doesn't happen throughout the regular iterations, but this is a time where teams can run FedEx days, Ship It days, hackathons, try to innovate from a business perspective, try to innovate from a technical perspective, learn new things, try new things that they haven't tried, have less structure. How efficient is that sprint in achieving innovation? It's really a matter of how often do we fill out our capacity load to the last couple of slivers of capacity throughout the rest of the PI, which typically leads to things spilling over into the IP iteration. And if that happens, there wouldn't be much innovation happening. People won't be in the mindset for it. People might have not, spent too much time refining their backlogs to get ready for PI planning. And that would be an indication that we might want to look at how to plan the work differently throughout the PI. But still, even if that's the case, PI planning could still happen in that second week of the IP iteration. But there's probably ways to improve how much time we carve for innovation in the first week.
Nice. Thanks for that question. We have got another one from Marty Talbot. This is a familiar name from our community. Thanks for being here, Marty. From an Agile perspective, are we swapping one framework, Waterfall, for SAFe framework from a transformational point of view? So do you see swapping Waterfall for SAFe as being the thing? I'd imagine I know where you're going to go with this, Yuval, but probably a question that gets asked quite a bit, right? Is this just another incarnation of RUP, of Waterfall? Kind of relating back to our article that we reviewed from Ken on Unsafe at Any Speed. So what's your take on this one?
No.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.
People have their own interpretations of stuff. I'm sure there are people out there that are using SAFe as a leaf to cover over, or as some lipstick on a waterfall. Not to call waterfall a pig, it can be useful in some places, but I'm sure that there are people, I've seen people do that. That's not what SAFe is about. That's not what any self-respecting SAFe practitioner is talking about, and that's certainly not what Scaled Agile or any SBCs or fellows like myself have in mind. Our mission is to help large organizations to become more agile in a way that respects where they are right now and is applicable for them. I'm sure that for some hardcore agile practitioners that have been working in agile for 20 years now, it might seem like SAFe is similar to a waterfall, but that's a change management perspective. We're using SAFe as a stepping stone for organizations to recognize where they need to be more agile and to work towards being more agile.
Yeah, I think if you took SAFe or Scrum or any other framework and made it into a mechanical monster, it could look like SAFe again, or it could look like Waterfall again, right? I think that's a to be fair, it's something that we're worried about regardless of the framework we put in place. Are we getting back to, I see it as being the difference between being deterministic and probabilistic, right? If we're trying to be deterministic in our work, that we want to figure out everything up front, we want to plan it perfectly because we believe we can plan complexity perfectly, which you can't. And then try to by sheer force of will, make a certain time, cost, or scope fit. And you can do that. You can abuse any framework into looking like that. I'm pretty sure I think you can even come up with a Kanban definition of workflow that looks awful like that as well.
Of course.
But it's something to
like your waterfall.
What's that?
It would look very much like your waterfall.
Right. And so I think we have to be careful about heading down that direction. But I think we also acknowledge that this certainly happens in a SAFe world. It happens in a Scrum world. It happens in a Kanban world. And hopefully we're able to inspect and adapt past that. I think that's the hope, at least. But it's a good question, Marty. It's something that comes up a lot. We appreciate you being here and asking. We have another one. So Yuval, I think this is from a SAFe fellow perspective. What's coming next? Like, is there anything that you can kind of talk about that's kind of in the front view of SAFe, and I guess from your own perspective, like if you could have your way, which area of the framework would you improve?
As a SAFe fellow in SBCT, I'm limited in how much I can talk about what is coming next to SAFe. SAFe is improving all the time, and it's been a while since there's been a major, release in the SAFe world. So make of it what you want. I would be if I were you, Jacob, or others, I would pay attention to what's going on and what Scaled Agile is talking about in the next couple of months. If you're asking me where the framework needs to be improved, what I would say is that, and I see those areas being improved over time. It should be clear what's the goal with SAFe, what are the principles, what's the relationship to agility. There should be more clarity, I think, more explicit guidance about whether we're talking about roles or accountabilities in SAFe. SAFe regards itself as a dual operating system, which means that it runs in parallel to the way the organization is structured, which is the way it should be. I think there should just be some more amplification and explicit guidance about the fact that this means that the roles that SAFe talks about, things like the Scrum Masters, release train engineers, product owners, product managers, they are accountabilities that people in the organization take on, whether those are existing people, whether those are people that we need to find for the organization, and those mappings might change over time. And that kind of relates to what's going on in the Agile world these specific days, where there's the conversation around, do we need dedicated Scrum Masters, for example, or is that a leadership responsibility that, we need to work with leaders to take on this accountability? I think SAFe could be clear on its perspective in this world. The other thing I hope that would change around SAFe, it's not necessarily in SAFe specifically, is to help make sure that SAFe, that the people that are guiding other people on how to implement SAFe, the people that are, for example, SAFe program consultants, SBCs, come and grow more of an Agile background to make sure that they're helping organizations towards the right path. And this is, a very tough problem, a problem that we're seeing in the field in general. I don't think it's very specific to SAFe, and we talked about it in some of the previous episodes. Same like the certified Scrum Master, professional Scrum Master certifications and classes don't ensure that people that hold that certification are Agilists. It just certifies that they've sat in a chair and taken an exam.
But arguably, right, just to counterbalance that a little bit, in order to teach for Scrum.org, you certainly have to prove quite a bit.
Yes.
And I don't believe that level of scrutiny is the same on an SBC standpoint.
And that's something that I personally don't like that much in the SAFe world, and I'm trying to do my best as a fellow in SBCT to
that was kind of the surprising part, and it's not I don't think it's a slight on SAFe. It just is what it is, and the fact that SBCs can teach has been one of the leading factors of SAFe's rapid adoption in the Agile world. The fact that the barrier to teaching is not as high as some of the other organizations, but to that end, it's also probably now turning into one of the deterrents, because as you spoke about earlier, there are some people that do take a waterfall view of SAFe, and it could be because non-Agilists are allowed to teach. And so what, I took your 4-day, SBC 5 course and got a lot out of it, learned a lot about SAFe. But at the end, when it came time to certify, I declined it. I've never led a SAFe implementation. I would never dare try to teach the framework. Although I'd imagine there are people in my situation that have never led a SAFe implementation or been a part of one that are now teaching the framework.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
That's fair criticism. The one thing I would add is that I'm, teaching the framework by people that have little agile experience or SAFe experience is one worrying thing. The other worrying thing that I hope we find a way to address in the future is that those people are also guiding and consulting organizations on how to implement. I'm both things are of concern to me.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot to answer for all of the sins of SAFe, but I do appreciate your insights here. And it sounds like a lot of the improvement areas that you would see, it seems like it's at least twofold, where better role clarity, right? I think that was kind of the genesis of one of your answers. And then this idea around, who's teaching the courses and how that works. And it sounds like those are two really good areas that could be improved, probably for the betterment of the framework.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily role clarity. I think role clarity is improving over the years, and there's pretty good clarity on what the roles mean. I think the clarity on mapping the role to the organization and to people in the organization is an area of improvement that I do see some gaps in.
Cool. Thanks for that. And Jacob, thank you for your great question. So Jared, and Jared's another familiar name in the community. So Jared, welcome. Question about one of our past episodes, right? So I think we did touch on the business value assignment exercise in a previous episode very briefly. He believes it's still based on assumption. So that's Jared's understanding. So Yuval, can you speak to what value this business value assignment exercise provides, as opposed to using flow metrics as a formula for forecasting? Does that question make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in SAFe, there's a mechanism that is called flow predictability. This specific metric doesn't have that much to do with flow, but what it basically talks about is how predictable, what it tries to address is how predictable are we in delivering the value that we set out to deliver. Not the output that we set out to deliver, the value or outcomes that we're setting out to deliver, which I think is a great improvement on measuring just velocity for the purposes of seeing are we improving or not.
Right.
SAFe does look at flow velocity as a way to forecast how much will we be able to achieve in an iteration or in a program increment. It uses the flow predictability to learn about our ability to deliver value or to forecast what value we can deliver. The way this works is as we go into each program increment, a set of iteration sprints that typically takes somewhere in between 8 to 12 weeks. What we forecast and commit to are a set of PI objectives. They are similar to the sprint goal in Scrum. Higher level, focusing on why, leaving a lot of negotiability to the what and the how to deliver them. Each team comes up with a set of PI objectives, and they have a conversation with their business stakeholders, with product management, business ownership around, are we in the right direction? Are we, addressing what's important to us? What's most important to us right now from a business perspective? That's the conversation that happens. The way we facilitate the conversation is we ask for each PI objective, between 1 and 10, how much of a business home run do we think this would be if we were to deliver it? It's, again, mainly about the conversation about these objectives that maybe drives rework and trying to figure out different objectives to focus on. But we record, the business value assignment that we had for each one of these PI objectives, and we get back to each one of these PI objectives throughout the program increment as we're delivering output, as we're delivering features that hopefully achieve the objectives. We're asking the same stakeholders, are we nailing it?
Yeah.
Are we delivering something that is nailing the business value? Has something changed maybe about what we think about business value that changes this scoring? Let's inspect that. Maybe we even have a chance to adopt that. But something else that we can do is also provide a number between 1 and 10 on, have we delivered here? Are we predictable in our ability to deliver business value? I don't care about how many stories we had to build, how many lines of code, whatever, in order to achieve or not achieve this objective, to deliver or not deliver this business value.
Yeah.
I care about what outcomes am I delivering. Now, Yeret is correct that in many cases, really depending on what's the release cadence of this agile release train or this set of teams that are delivering, if they're not really deploying and releasing to the real customers during their PI, at the time that we're scoring this actual business value, what we can look at is an increment that's shippable, releasable, not necessarily shipped, released. We don't yet have telemetry from actual users. If we are using continuous delivery, continuous deployment, we might already have that information, and that should be what we score. But in case we don't, it's still a forecast of, are we delivering real value or not?
Well, and I still think there's always,
but we should still consider it a forecast, and in my view, get back to it later on and maybe look at it again once we have deployed, released it, learned from actual use. I actually have a blog post around it, around this specific topic that I even talked about at the SAFE Summit.
But this is always going to be assumption driven until the very last moment when a customer says yay or nay. And even then that's one voice, not 100 and so I think it, to Yared's point, this is always going to be rooted in some form of assumption. Yuval, I think this is not just a SAFE issue. This is just a delivery issue, right? I think it's good that SAFE tries to put a number on it. In Scrum, we try to, we have different complementary practices that we try to put a number on it. Lately I've been swayed by Vacanti quite a bit to where maybe value doesn't matter. And we should just set up the best flow system possible to get as many small bets through it as possible. Because we can't actually know the value until it's delivered, right? We have hunches, we have assumptions, we can try to order things, but since you don't know until the end, your goal should actually be to set up a system that gets as many things through, high quality, usable, like we want all the good things, but as soon as responsibly possible. And I'm almost there to where maybe these debates about value take a back seat and we just get our flow systems in such a great state that it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I've had enough chats with Daniel Vacanti about this. I'm not convinced yet. I mean, there are some environments where
let me give an example.
It's more valuable than that. I would agree that nailing exactly how much value is there in something,
right?
No way. It's all assumptions and hypotheses. And I think we're all on the same page that what's important is a very, very strong empirical flow system where you make an assumption, acknowledge that it's an assumption, quickly close the loop on an increment and learn whether there's real value or not before you proceed. I think that's core to everything we're doing.
I think one of the few exceptions would be when a legal, compliance, regulatory, governmental thing comes in. And basically they say, if you do not do this work, we will shut you down. Value is infinite in that space. If you cannot operate unless you do this thing by this date, then the value is to the top. But even then, legal will argue to do the A+ version of the solution, and everyone else will argue to get the D-. Right. So even then there's still speculation about what actually has to be done. So, hey, maybe it's a complex world and there's some unknowns that we have to adapt to, right?
Yep.
Great question, Jared. Todd Scanlon comes in. Todd's another familiar face in the community. Can you touch on SAFe and the similar McKenzie model? Switch is a hybrid of SAFe, Spotify, OKRs. Is this familiar to you, Yuval, the McKenzie model?
I've heard of it. What should I say about it? Or
we can come back to it. Or maybe it's just they're out there and these are different models. And
they're out there. One thing I would say about the SAFe, Spotify, and OKR space, rather than talk specifically to McKinsey's model. I mean, McKinsey have, their reasons to use their own model. You can imagine some of these are commercial. Yes.
Well, you don't have to license SAFe if you come up with your very similar thing.
Yes.
And that's just speculation. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
That's just a kind of sort of maybe allegedly comment on my part.
And it's not just McKinsey that
a lot of companies do this. Yep.
The fact that there is a Spotify model that they could use without, license.
Yuval, who had
consider that a model?
Who did Auto Scrum, which is a SAFe-based kind of thing that's used in automotive right now? Is that another McKinsey?
I'm not sure.
But I know there's a bunch of these. What I'm saying is there's a lot of these floating around.
Yes.
So it's not a novel idea to make some modifications and try to do your own thing with it.
I think if you really look at the Scaled Agile framework and the Spotify model as described in Henrik's videos model, right? You'll see a lot of similarity, to be honest. I mean, if you look at what's really the Spotify model, the principles behind the practices that they're using, there's a lot of similarity between Spotify and the principles that SAFe is talking about. So I could definitely see, and I've seen organizations that are pulling in the best out of the Scaled Agile framework, the good ideas out of the Spotify model. The more the conversation is about principles, the more effective that is. The more it is about cool names for stuff or calling stuff, existing stuff, new names to say that you've implemented an Agile framework, the less valuable and the more of a laughing stock it becomes. OKRs are another element that is used these days in the Scaled Agile framework, and to the best of my knowledge, something similar is or very similar is in use, as part of how Spotify operates as well, which wouldn't be surprising considering who they are and what they're doing. There's what I would recommend to practitioners is take a look at the underlying principles of each one of these approaches, look and understand the similarities, and think about how they can work effectively together. SAFe and OKRs, there's already, guidance as part of SAFe on how to use them effectively together that I would suggest looking at.
So, Yuval, we have another question from Zach, who's a member of our community. So as a consultant, he might or might not, I think this is a hypothetical. A leadership team is saying that the Agile Manifesto and principles do not apply to an organization of their size or scale. We need a tried and true process to be Agile like SAFe. How would you respond to some kind of leadership statement that came in? I think that's actually a neat one to try to break down, right?
Yeah.
So the implication here is that SAFe is not based on the manifesto, the principles or values, which I think you would actually disagree with, right?
Yeah. what I would probably show these people is how safe is an application, an implementation, instantiation of the Agile Manifesto and its principles at organization of scale, which is actually what we spend the first half day of any leading safe class walking through. So
So what do you think would be...
I've been exposed to a good SBC, in other words, and a good leading safe class, I mean, I haven't heard that question, to be honest. And part of it might be because it's so obvious when I talk to organizations that, SAFe is a scaled agile framework, not a scaled waterfall framework. And agile is there not just because agile is a cool buzzword that needs to be part of, any framework that wants to make money these days. It's there because it's designed to be a scaled agile framework. At least the way I talk about it and the way organizations that I work with look at it. So,
I think this is one where if I had to defend this statement, and I'm kind of glad I don't have to, right? This would be a hard one to, I think you almost just, I think you start off with this idea of, kind of similar to the line you're going down, that is scaled agility. And I think the statement comes from this idea that there's a lot more prescription in SAFe than there is in Scrum or Kanban. I think that's just a fair statement. It is a more prescriptive framework.
There's more guidance in SAFe than in Scrum and Kanban, yes.
Yeah, and so that I just want you to keep me honest with this. But even through the prescription, there's ability to inspect and adapt what you're doing, but there is a lot more defined up front. And so, pick your poison there. We also see plenty, again, to just be fair, we see plenty of Scrum teams try to fill in the framework with the wrong things, and they end up off the rails, and they blame the framework, and they and so I think the prescription gives you some guides and guards to get started with. It tries to meet a company where it's at. Whether or not you agree philosophically that that's a way to go, I think that's a good discussion. But I think if you start by dismantling the idea of prescription as being a negative, which I don't know if I could do with a straight face, but I think that's where you have to start dismantling that argument, and then you can start putting the principles and values back in. I think that's how I would approach it, Zach, is that I would attack prescription head on and then start working through the ideas. But your mileage might vary there.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, Ryan, I'm thinking back to Shuari, right?
Sure.
Alistair Coburn talks a lot about Shuari. He's the last person you could say that, is against Agile, right? But we sometimes need the practices in order to understand the principles.
I will say there is something nice about not having to make a decision. So what the first 12 years of my career was as a Java developer. I think one of the weaknesses of early Java development was that you had an unlimited number of choices for frameworks, for tools. And when I went over and looked at .NET and C#, Microsoft made a lot of decisions for you. This is how you will do unit testing. This is how you will do deployment. And I'll tell you what, my anxiety and stress level dropped.
Yeah.
There is something to be said for the benefit of not having to make so many choices. It's like, when you get asked, what do you want for dinner? All of us go, oh, I don't want to make a choice. I think there's that same relief that comes with picking a framework like SAFe, where it's like, don't ask me what I want. Just tell me what's on the menu. And I think there is something to be said for that as well, right?
Yeah, I agree. As long as we understand that our organizations are a bit more complex than figuring out dinner.
Correct.
And while, we start with a certain safe starting point, we should remember that Shu is just the beginning, and over time we want to mature into Ha and Ri. And that's also our role as leaders in this community, to help organizations have a safer starting point. That's okay, but also to encourage these people to understand the principles, the why, at the right timing. Meet the organizations where they are, and at the right timing, challenge them to throw away the practices that don't make sense in their context. and leverage the right principles to do the right thing rather than make things, easier by, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yep.
That's where the principles are important.
Very good. Mary Miller is in the chat. Hello, Mary. She was just noting that the insight on SBC was helpful, and it's a tough question, not unique to SAFe. Saw it with Agile coaches too. I think the credentials and the this whole idea of the right people teaching and training. Everyone wants to define who the right person is, and that's a very hard thing to do. But there is something to be said for, having been in the role and then actually teaching the role. And I think this is a conversation that, especially in our current economic climate, Yuval, we're going to see this play out even more. We're seeing organizations actually removing entire groups of Agilists.
Yep.
And I mean, those are great people that are now finding themselves in this situation. But there's also this idea of the organizations are looking at this role as being a temporary, or as being a not needed long term. And so I think our industry could be heading into this inflection moment, or this inflection point, where some of these concerns really start bubbling up as far as, who are the right Agile coaches and who are the right PSTs and CSTs and SBCs and, whatever acronyms are out there. So I actually expect this conversation to heat up as we continue through 2023. Any thoughts on that there?
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to be sure to say, if you've been impacted by this, we're not disparaging anyone. Like, there are some great people out there that have reached out that we know have been impacted by this, and they are amazing Agilists. And so we are certainly supportive, and we want to make sure everyone ends up in a good spot. So definitely not a disparaging comment, just noting that this will spark, I think, a conversation related to some of the things we've talked about previously.
Yes, I see two things happening in parallel here. One is, exactly what you pointed out, Ryan. There's more scrutiny around what's the value of these roles, what's the contribution of the agile coaching roles. And I see that more around, Scrum Master, release train engineer, the SBC roles, whatever the framework that's in use. What's the contribution of the people that have these roles to the organization? And I see a variety. I see some great people that struggle to show evidence or talk the way that resonates to organizations to keep investing in continuous improvement. Yeah. I see organizations that, in the economic reality of right now, even if this organization believes that there is value in continuous improvement and what these coaching capabilities that these people bring, they can't afford it right now. They are really looking for how to extend the runway with the interest rates being so high. The whole their shareholders, their investors are telling them correctly they need to think about how to extend their runway at all costs, and process improvement, continuous improvement, improving the ability to deliver. They might say, yes, strategically that's important, we cannot do that right now. So that's part of what we're seeing in the market as well. And there are organizations where maybe these great coaches have done too great of a job and created, I say too great of a job a bit sarcastically, but it is our job as Agilists to create capabilities in other people. When I look at myself as a coach, a trainer, a consultant, I succeed when I create agile leadership capabilities in the organizations that I work with. So I don't intend to be with an organization for a long while. I agree with you that there's an issue around the fact that the industry gravitated towards having Scrum Mastery and Agile coaching roles as stable roles in organizations forever, and created this expectation that people will be in these roles, which created a lot of great jobs for people that we're now, starting to see less stability around, but also has a downside that maybe doesn't create enough space for self-organization, for leaders to actually take on continuous improvement themselves. And it's a bit ironic that the great coaches, Scrum Masters, the organizations where these people did their job really well, created the opportunity for these organizations to say, you know what, in this day and age, we can take flight on our own. We don't need this help anymore. Which is painful for a lot of people, but it's actually the reality of a coaching role. It's not an easy role, the coaching role, the Scrum Master role that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it certainly isn't. And so it will be interesting to see how this continues to play out. We hope that everyone out there impacted is doing all right.
Yeah. So that's one side of the conversation. I think the SBCs. There's another question here about the SBCs. Maybe
there's definitely some leveling up and
So I hope that the market will, and I'm seeing the market self-regulate about SBCs, same like it's doing for Scrum Masters. The fact that somebody has a CSM or PSM certification, for most organizations, is a data point. It's not the data point and the proof that they would put an agile team in this Scrum Master's hands, and let them lead them towards agility. I hope that that's happening for SBCs as well. My expectation from SAI is to support the market in that, provide additional data points, provide additional education about what to expect from an SBC, what to look at. Same like in Scrum.org, we help people understand what to expect from a Scrum Master, what are the Scrum Master choices or stances, how to look at Scrum Masters. I hope that SAI would help the market understand how to look at SBCs and what to expect from them, so that SBCs would continue the journey towards mastery of Agile and Agile at scale, rather than just rely on their certificate. I know a lot of SBCs that are Agile practitioners that are seeing this as a journey, and I'm seeing enough of them that worry me, to be honest.
Yeah, Olaf Neeson is another good friend of the show and active community member. Helping professionals are only considered valuable as long as there's someone who acknowledges that they have a problem. So I think that's a big, if an organization doesn't acknowledge the issue, then these roles are not considered nearly as valuable. But then the trouble that he rightly points out is that it's also really self-serving if these professionals only point at problems, yet they always go unsolved. Right. So there's these dynamic balances at play. And I think Olaf makes a great point here. I think there are some things in our community that really have to be reconsidered. And this might be the year that some things get reshuffled.
So. And I think there's something here. I mean, if I was going to a therapist or to a coach, yes, I would consider them valuable for me as long as I still see I have a problem. But if I'm going to a coach or a therapist and I continue to have the same problem on a consistent basis,
Yep.
I would walk away pretty fast. So my assumption is that as professionals in our practice, we need to solve problems. If there are still interesting problems to work on, we would love to, continue to support, others on. But if they reach the point where there are existing problems they don't need us for, then, it's okay for them to walk away.
Well, then Jared,
That's the way I look at it.
and then Jared put a nice little cap on this too. Good coaches, Scrum Master, similar roles, they're typically working towards putting themselves out of a job, right? I think it's back to your point earlier, Yuval, that this idea that it's a long-term stable position might be incorrect. And again, I think this will be the conversation that plays out over 2023 that, what does it mean to be an agile coach? What does it mean to be a Scrum Master, whether you're in a safe environment or not?
Yeah.
I would expect that even that this applies to even SBCs, that eventually the organization is going to say, thanks.
Yeah. I think there's a huge difference, just to clarify, between, maybe not huge, but there's a difference between the SBC, which is by design a consultant, right? A coach outside of the context of a specific team, and the Scrum Master.
Yep.
SBCs are more like agile coaches, which we consider something that would be transient, temporary. In many environments, they might still be with the same organization, but the problem that they focus on hopefully changes over time. Maybe it's different problems in the context of the same team or business unit. Maybe they move to other things. Scrum Master is an accountability related to the agile team and the organization. They could still switch between problems and contexts and move between focusing on the team's impediments and then getting to the point that the team doesn't have major impediments at their level. The impediment is at the group, at the organization. That's something we talk about. But there's also this perspective that the Scrum Master is an accountability. It's a way to show up as a leader. And my thinking is that in most organizations moving forward, or in many organizations moving forward, this perspective that Scrum Master is how you show up as a leader. Coaching is one choice, one stance you should be very effective at as a leader. This is where we're going. We would need people like you and me to help these leaders in organizations learn how to do that.
Certainly.
They would not necessarily need people that are dedicated to Scrum Mastery, which is, by the way, very different than how we talked about it 10 years ago.
Yep.
There is this whole statement around managers stay out of the room. They don't come to agile training. There's no manager role in Scrum. Yes, there is. There isn't a manager role in Scrum, but it doesn't mean that managers or leaders don't have an accountability to creating effective Scrum, all the way to maybe showing up as the Scrum Master for a team or for their organization.
Yeah, I think this is one of the pivots that certainly could happen, right? That it's seen more, even Scrum Master is seen more as, the director or the manager is taking that on. And that could be an interesting shift in the community. Like, we'll have to see what happens there, but I think we've hit our time box, Yuval.
Yes.
So a lot of great questions came in. Sorry that we couldn't get to everything that came up, but I think we hit the major ones. We really appreciate everyone being out there. We're going to try to make this a more regular thing. So if you liked what you saw, hit us up in the comments. Be sure to check out the past YouTube videos. And Yuval, thanks for making yourself available as a safe fellow and SBCT to take on these questions. The hot seat's not always comfortable, but you did a great job. So we certainly appreciate you doing that. And again, everybody out there, our members, we certainly appreciate you being out here. I know we saw Zach out there in the chat, along with, I think he was our only member, that showed up today. So it was great to see you out there, Zach, and of course our good friends who are always great contributors in the community. We saw Mary, we saw Jared. We also saw, who am I forgetting? Olaf was out there for a bit, Marty Talbot, all of you, great. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you again when we fire up the live stream and take your questions on Breaking the Safe. Take care, everybody.